Yeah, I think it comes down to that, is really recognizing the population's needs and then understanding the diet. So as it working in the realm of nutrition, it's saying, okay, what are some foods that or ethnic foods that are consumed on a daily basis, and finding ways to make that fit with their goals. So a lot of times, and I know all of us can kind of relate to this, is we hear foods being grouped as good or bad, but at the end of the day, it's really just finding balance. And I think culturally relevant foods fits in that of finding, okay, it doesn't mean it's a good or bad food, but just recognizing how do we balance it to fit like maybe a higher fiber, or increasing the protein, or adjusting the carbohydrate load, just to help with blood sugar balance. So I think it's also a lot of educating our population that we're working on and building their self-management so that they feel confident that, hey, like I can take any ethnic dish and I can balance it in a way that I feel nourished, and then I'm also enjoying the food that I'm eating, and it's also helping me work towards my goals.
Welcome back, everyone. We got another episode for you on A Plate Full of Insights, brought to you by the team at Revive Wellness. I'm Brandon. I'm here with Matthew again, and I want to introduce another person that we brought on the podcast. I would love to have you give a little intro to the people listening or watching.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Brandon. So like Brandon said, my name is Roshni. I'm one of the dietitians at the amazing team at Revive. And I guess with my work at Revive, I've been around for a while, but it's kind of evolved more into a lot of chronic disease management and prenatal care, and trying to bring a little bit more culturally relevant practice and nutrition support into my day to day. So always learning. And I feel like what's so amazing about our team is we all have different niches and we're constantly learning from one another. So I think this podcast as well is a great way to kind of have those conversations that we have behind the scenes, but kind of bring it forward for more listeners to hear, because I think they're valuable. So kind of cool that we're able to bring this forward now.
I agree with you there. Always cool to have, a peek into our brains and the conversations that we may not always have time for in our sessions or presentations or what have you. But I'm super excited to have you with us. We got a really cool topic to talk about today that I'm excited to go into. March is Nutrition Month. The theme that Dietitians of Canada, so for those of you not aware, every Nutrition Month, Dietitians of Canada releases a central theme that we dietitians like to focus on with any of the content we put out, just spark conversation with people that we work with around nutrition. And this year's is called, actually for the next 2 years, I should say, not just this year's, it's called Nourish to Flourish. And the aim of this theme is to encapsulate and bring together all of the areas that impact nutrition and focus on the role that food and nutrition plays in our lives beyond simply the physical components of how our body responds to nutrition and vice versa. So this talk today is going to be diving into some of those areas that we find, at least top of mind, most impactful. Literally every time that we do a podcast episode, I say we could talk about this for hours. So we're not going to make this an exhaustive list of things that we find interesting in this realm. Perhaps we'll talk about it again at some point in the future, but nonetheless, a really cool opportunity to dig into all the areas that nutrition impacts, whether it's physical, social, emotional, cultural, you name it. There's something there with nutrition. So we have a few key points that we want to dig into, but given that we have Roshni here, I want to make sure that most of the conversation is spent around topics that you find interesting, Roshni, and also Matthew. I find this topic really awesome, and I want to spend some of the time listening and seeing what the both of you have to say, because I'm sure everybody else watching and listening will love to know. So who wants to take the first point? What comes to mind in terms of a key topic that you think is important in this context of Nutrition Month, the theme being Nourish to Flourish?
I think it's important to say just to start off that it's like you mentioned, Brandon. It's multidimensional, so it's hard to isolate one part from the other. Which I think is kind of cool with this theme is recognizing how we've been as dietitians trying to advocate for this, but seeing this now kind of brings it forward. Of food and nutrition has an emotional impact. It has a cultural impact. It's interconnected with our mental health, and so when we are practicing and seeing clients and kind of walking on their health journey, it's often considering everything from that bigger picture. So I don't know, Matthew, if you find that as well in your practice and what kind of comes to mind with the topic there for you.
Yeah, I think that this is a very important focus for Nutrition Month. In, like you said, it's a lot more than just food, both in terms of what impacts our food choices and then the impact that our food has on the rest of our health. Food goes a long way in not just nutrition, but other aspects of physical health, mental health, emotional wellness. And then it goes the other way around too, where things like stress can impact what we eat, things like culture can impact what we eat. And it's good that the dietitians of Canada this year are focusing, and next year are focusing on the transformative nature of food in our lives beyond just meeting our nutritional needs.
Yeah, 100%. And then if we kind of break it apart, like if we were to focus on, like I always think about lifestyle medicine as well, and how a lot of these principles are embodied by it. For those that aren't familiar, lifestyle medicine is a branch of medicine that focuses on using health behaviors like changes in our sleep and physical activity and stress management, alcohol use, and using those as important pillars of health. And the philosophy is making changes in those lifestyle areas can help manage and prevent chronic disease. So, in lifestyle medicine, breaking it apart, is there like something, Matthew, that comes to mind that's relevant to Nourish to Flourish?
Well, I think that many of the pillars of lifestyle medicine are going to be relevant. So, just starting with the nutrition pillar, of course, that one is more direct, talking about how certain aspects of our diet can help with managing and preventing chronic disease, as you said. So, things like high fiber are emphasized, things like a more of a plant based but not plant exclusive kind of diet. But then it goes a step further, quite related to this year's theme, in talking about some of the other pillars of lifestyle medicine that are related. So things like social connection, which plays a role in food, in terms of culture, community, social gatherings of any kind, cultural identity in its relation to food, that kind of thing. Stress management is another pillar of lifestyle medicine where stress can impact what we eat. And those are, again, it's one of those ones that goes back and forth. Another aspect of lifestyle medicine that is related is physical activity. And that's another one we can get into in a bit, about how physical activity supports nutrition and how nutrition supports physical activity, back and forth there. And then the ones that you mentioned about things like alcohol use and other substance use, as well as sleep, which is another topic that relates to nutrition. So I'd say that they're actually very tied together, because there are a lot of connections between nutrition, physical activity, mental health, sleep, stress, and all of that.
I was just thinking as Matthew was sharing there, like the interconnection between mental health and nutrition. And I've just recently, because I work with quite a few individuals with diabetes and other chronic disease, like the research, it's interesting to look at how like there was an increase in the number of people that were diagnosed with diabetes that also developed depression throughout that diagnosis as well, and vice versa. Individuals with depression were almost 60% more likely to develop diabetes down the line. So I think it's when we think about nutrition, it's more than just the physiological. It's looking at how the mental health and the gut brain axis is impacting so much more than just the physiological, always looking at the emotional and the mental health too.
Yeah, and that interconnectedness is important to highlight, because some people will think that, yeah, nutrition is just nutrition, or eating choices are just like a knowledge thing. It's just like but if like for the average, if you show them a picture, like, is this a healthy diet? Is this is this something we should have more of or less of? Most people understand those things to quite a high extent. It's really the what is realistic in terms of each person's individual lifestyle and what their specific needs are for them and what works for them. So it goes a lot deeper than that in encompassing overall lifestyle.
100%. And I think that's so huge as well is like we know about like social determinants of health and how food insecurity or like social supports play a huge role in if we're even able to make changes. So I know often at Revive when we are meeting with our clients, it's a lot about asking what feels realistic for you right now, and this can extend to any type of behavior change. I feel like with understanding readiness as well. So maybe you're in a space where you have all the supports and you're feeling like you can make change, and that's a great time to act on a goal. But it's also okay to acknowledge and also have that conversation of like, hey, like I have a lot going on right now, and maybe focusing on bringing physical activity, for example, or making changes to my diet isn't really realistic, and maybe we can kind of look down the path of stress management and ways to go about that. So I think it's really important as healthcare providers as well, just to have that conversation and make it a normal thing in our practice of like, it's okay if you're not ready, and acknowledging that is also very powerful.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we've probably all experienced and experience continuously people coming in and wanting to do essentially everything at once. Sometimes it's the initial worry or fear after a recent diagnosis. Sometimes it's, yeah, some kind of health scare. Sometimes it's just a sudden spark of motivation where I want to do everything. And sometimes that conversation around it's okay if it's not everything at once. We want to work for more gradual, sustainable changes. It's okay to take this one step at a time, focus on one thing, not 10. And yeah, that is oftentimes a part of nutrition counseling in general and health coaching in general.
I'm curious on that note for the two of you because I've had that conversation many times with clients where they're coming in at the early stages and a lot of momentum perceived in the realm of nutrition. They want our support, your support with improving their life in some way, whatever that may look like. And but in the back of your mind that there's these other factors that are at play, and I feel like we talk about it all the time, we live it, so we know it's kind of a natural extension to nutrition for all of us. But for somebody coming to you that's hyper focused on the food and nutrition piece, understandably so, how do you approach that initial conversation? Because it's can kind of, depending on the context, seem a bit jarring. We're going to focus on these other things. Why aren't you hyper focusing on nutrition? Aren't you a nutritionist slash dietitian? Isn't that what we're going to be doing? So I'm curious, how do you approach that initial conversation early on with the people that you've worked with?
It's a good question, Brandon. I think there's a lot of ways you can go about it depending on the individual. And I think what I try to do is just ask, what's most meaningful to you right now. And that can kind of guide you in terms of like maybe it is a nutrition goal and we can focus the assessment on that. But I also acknowledge that just like lifestyle medicine and what we've been sharing today, that reaching that goal, it can take a lot of different paths, and then understanding the path that the client feels comfortable taking, but then also acknowledging that it's an ebb and flow. Like I'm yet to find a patient or a client that follows like a linear path. And we know that any type of behavior change, you're going to have wins and you're going to have challenges and there's going to be ups and downs. So I think being transparent in that regard and saying, hey, like, we'll start with nutrition, but if you feel like down the line, stress becomes a concern or sleep is impacted, we should kind of pivot and adjust our plan with that, but always keeping it patient or client centered at the end of the day.
Yeah, similarly for me, in that initial session, it's getting out that those wider ideas in terms of motivations, challenges, and lifestyle factors that are going to be relevant for what is realistic for now, foreseeable challenges, and then of course there are always unforeseeable challenges. So just keeping all of those things in mind, you have somewhat of a map or a journey to begin with, but recognizing it's not always going to be that linear path. You might be able to say, in, let's say, a follow up in 2 weeks after this, we will probably focus on these goals that we set or these set of things. Early on, that's often starts the way you see it because it's closer in the future, but later down the road, and really the longer you go, the less predictable things are. Like, I'm sure, like, it's only March, and I'm sure that many people have had some unexpected challenge already a quarter of the way through the year. So it's not always that straight path, but we do always have those main goals at the back of our mind, uh those main motivations and those known challenges to try to beat that, or yeah, try to work around those things as we can see them, but recognizing that more things may and often will come up.
I like that. I like that a lot. It's a thing that we, unsurprisingly, if you've listened or watched any of our episodes, there's a ton of material that we've already covered on many of these areas. Uh, so it's, but I always say to myself and to everybody on the team that, these topics are worth repeating. They're worth talking about in many different ways, even a somewhat similar way, but slightly different in the time of year. It really just depends on how it hits for all of you that are listening and watching with all of this. I'm I'm particularly curious because this is an area that I know both you are passionate about. Roshni, you mentioned this earlier in the episode around culturally appropriate care, and it's not a thing that I feel like. I mean, heck, even looking in my past and my training and our university coursework, we talked a little bit about this, but I feel like it's something that's often not thought about in the same way as others, like on the same level. But I feel like what you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of impact that could be had in terms of impacting one's journey, outcomes, and more than just, speaking to somebody in a culturally appropriate way. It's deeper than that. What are your thoughts on how does that feed into all of this for you, and how important is it in the, I guess, pretty much every single area that nutrition plays a role in?
Yeah, it's a big question. Um, I think a lot of it comes down to really understanding the needs of a population. And so, like, working in predominantly, like for myself in a South Asian community, we know that diabetes is one of the top risk factors. South Asians are more likely to develop insulin resistance or prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. And so, understanding that risk also means looking at what supports you can offer, right? So, yeah, I think it comes down to that, is really recognizing the population's needs and then understanding the diet. So as it working in the realm of nutrition, it's saying, okay, what are some foods that or ethnic foods that are consumed on a daily basis, and finding ways to make that fit with their goals. So a lot of times, and I know all of us can kind of relate to this, is we hear foods being grouped as good or bad, but at the end of the day, it's really just finding balance. And I think culturally relevant foods fits in that of finding, okay, it doesn't mean it's a good or bad food, but just recognizing how do we balance it to fit, like maybe a higher fiber or increasing the protein or adjusting the carbohydrate load, just to help with blood sugar balance. So I think it's also a lot of educating our population that we're working on and building their self management so that they feel confident that, hey, like I can take any ethnic dish and I can balance it in a way that I feel nourished, and then I'm also enjoying the food that I'm eating, and it's also helping me work towards my goals.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Roshni said. It really starts with an understanding of the population that you're serving or working with. Some of us are lucky, and that simply starts with like where we grew up or where we live. And then also, if you're lucky, some of your supervisors or preceptors may also be more partial to that kind of stuff and help you out there. But beyond that, it is on healthcare professionals themselves to be familiar with the populations that they're working with. Um, Not just not just, let's say, a predominant population, but minority populations in terms of whether it be a certain ethnic background, certain religious background, and just knowing that with the population of whether it be your local community or just Canada nationally, those are things that you're going to need to be aware of and be able to incorporate in your practice. And I think another piece is also emphasizing that to people. Uh, if you have taken the time to build that culturally competent care and in your practice, then making sure that people are aware of that and emphasizing that, because a lot of people will go into some kind of, well, I think actually nutrition is going to be probably the biggest one, going into it thinking that they'll be told to stop doing things that are meaningful to them, things like cultural foods and such, but emphasizing that, like Roshni said, we can make modifications. We can not even necessarily be changing ingredients, but changing like proportions and stuff like that, and starting there so that you're still able to enjoy foods that you're used to. You're not going to be told to eat like the cover of Canada's food guide if those are not foods that you eat. And also just having resources in place of that that you can also share that are culturally relevant to people.
I feel like I always go to like the people that I've talked to that have worked with people of different cultures and the messaging that they're exposed to, and then the stuff that I hear from people that we've worked with, either at Revive or in our profession. I'm always curious about the impact of the general messaging that one can find on social media, internet, blogs, Reddit, wherever you spend time looking at. And I feel like a lot of the difficult areas in the diet and nutrition and lifestyle and fitness, even spaces that are kind of myths or trends or really like polarizing messages around nutrition that don't necessarily have an evidence base. A lot of times we think it's just, it stops at, somebody's interaction with what we kind of would summarize to be diet culture would stop at like, oh, I'm just gonna, carbs are, I'm picking on carbs for a sec here. The common thing is we should eat less carbohydrates. Carbohydrates aren't good. We've seen a lot of that type of messaging. But if you don't step back and think and appreciate that it's not just like rice and potatoes and pasta and bread, like I'm just not going to stop eating bread for a little while. Like there's a lot of implications beyond there that can impact very specific groups of people in different cultures that have a large part of their eating come from specific groups of foods. And if they're kind of captured in that type of messaging, now to be clear, this is never the type of messaging that you'll have, I hope, coming out of the mouth of a dietitian. I know 100% for sure that'll never come out of the mouth of a Revive dietitian. But nonetheless, is my gut right in that those types of messages just hit for different cultures, different groups, different communities in ways that just are so, negatively. I'm trying to describe my words adequately here, but hopefully the question comes across, because I feel like that's superbly impactful in ways that we commonly don't think about. Is that the case? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that's a huge part of nutrition in general. Is there's so much information out there, so it can be overwhelming to feel like, okay, I'm trying to make changes to my diet, but I'm getting about 10, 20 different opinions on how I can, manage, for example, the blood sugar example. I have patients come in and say, I don't know where to start. So I think it's a lot of, again, building up the confidence of knowing what works best for you. So a lot of what we do day to day is help clients with understanding and building awareness around what's important to them. So for example, like a higher carbohydrate diet. So we know that a lot of ethnic dishes might emphasize carbs more. That can come from more of like plant-based proteins, for example. So a lot of like beans, peas, lentils, they naturally have a little bit more fiber, carbohydrates, and then also a little bit of protein. But usually those lentils or legumes are paired with some sort of starch. And so the carbohydrates can kind of stack up more than maybe other diets that are lower in those types of foods. So I think just kind of breaking down the science, and I encourage all of my clients and anyone out there that's kind of feeling overwhelmed with this information to just sit down with your dietitian or even like another healthcare provider and say, can you help me break down this nutrition information, and then applying that to yourself. So even if it is a higher carb diet, it doesn't mean that's a bad thing for you. If your goal is to just increase energy or fiber, that might be the way to go. So I think to sum it up, it's understanding what your needs are, what's important to you, and then breaking down the science and not kind of going with, okay, this person on social media says this is how they lost 50 pounds. I'm going to go for this kind of strategy. That sounds extreme, but sometimes that is what's out there. So I think it's always important to take a step back and then have that conversation at looking at the actual science behind that claim.
Yeah. And in addition to working with a professional to evaluate the evidence base of claims online, another thing to recognize is that even some things that are true, if you're just propagating it online to a very general audience, then it might be very general information that doesn't apply to one specific individual. Let's say that you were recently, let's just use diabetes as an example again. You were recently diagnosed with diabetes or pre-diabetes, and you're seeing a lot of general information about what's healthy, what's unhealthy. Some of it may or may not be false, but it may or may not be directly applicable to you, whether it be a specific condition, specific foods that you already eat and ways to improve those to work on your condition. It's, yeah, just very general information, which is when, if you'd like to go beyond that, something like working with a professional or doing research on a very specific topic would be more relevant, or even following people that focus on that specific condition. Someone who's, yeah, let's see, more diabetes focused versus a very general nutrition education type of account. Just following people that are more reputable, provide sources and that evidence base, like Roshni said, but also things that are truly more relevant and meaningful to you and your specific needs if we are going down the route of looking for social media content.
That's a good point. Both of you, excellent points. I like that one line, Matthew, you mentioned about how a lot of information may not necessarily be false, but it just may not be applicable, which I think a lot of times when I'm talking with people is where the confusion comes from, because it's so multifaceted, as we've probably mentioned a couple times in this episode thus far. I think that a lot of it could be true, but that may be a source of contradiction in some areas, wherein it's all true depending on the individual. But that's usually where the tough part comes in from, and navigating all of those variables, which I feel like, although we can talk about them and they're all important, add a lot of additional complexity to it, that when you are working with somebody like Roshni, you mentioned, like, where do I start? Like it's just, draw, like put 100 pieces of paper in a hat and draw one out random. Like it feels like that some days. And even for me, I'm on this side. I am the healthcare professional, and it still feels like that sometimes, because it's just like, man, there's so many factors that could be impactful. It is difficult to choose one sometimes, I feel like.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brandon. I was just going to mention like a tool that potentially folks could use is creating a journal, because it sounds like something so simple, but so powerful if we just want to be like, okay, what is really my focus? Because a lot of times you're right, we might not really know where we want to start. So I think building a journal and recording some of these things we've talked about today, your sleep, your stress, your mood, your exercise or physical activity, and kind of your eating and seeing, are there any patterns I can pull out from that? And one might stand out to you that you resonate with, of like, hey, like I'm a shift worker and I'm noticing on my night shifts, I'm unable to kind of eat regularly, and that's impacting my energy. So that might be something you can bring forward to your dietitian, and then kind of break apart some actionable things you can do step by step to treat that. So that, yeah, just a thought is sometimes journaling can be a good place, and self-reflecting on what's your priority.
Yeah, I think that can be very valuable for bringing that self-awareness to things, and then just knowing what you would like to discuss or what you would like to focus on once we've built that awareness. Like it, yeah, on the surface, it does sound kind of gimmicky, like just journal, but it can be more insightful than it sounds like it would be. And in addition to that, if you're journaling to bring certain questions or thoughts forward that you'd like to discuss, that can also be a good place to write down questions that you have in the meantime. So, whether it be you read something relevant to the area that you're working in, or just a random question that popped up as you were journaling, that can be a good way to just organize your thoughts and have that ready to go for that next appointment and make things there more meaningful, planned out, and efficient too.
Yeah, I appreciate the point you mentioned, Matthew, about it seems gimmicky. What's this going to do? And I think a lot of times and I feel this, when I'm working with people one on one, there's this like hope that we as the dietitians are going to come into that situation and just have the answers immediately, and like the concepts are just going to hit, and we know all of these other areas that have impact on somebody's decisions, access to food, preferences, whatever the case is for that person. And until we understand those, at least a little bit, because even a little bit of an understanding can be impactful. Obviously, the more the better. But if the individual that we're working with is not quite there of understanding that, then we have to get them there, and then that understanding can come, and then we can build from there. And it's sometimes a process, but ultimately, I feel like everybody would agree that we ultimately want the best for the people that we're working with. And I know I can't do my job until I understand at least some of those things for the people that I'm working with, because I feel like otherwise I can't do my job properly. But ultimately, it's going to lead to more and more impactful outcomes. Going to lead to, you're going to have about more of a purpose and a why. Your why is going to be stronger than it would be otherwise if you were just kind of, oh, I just want to eat better and I just want to, eat more vegetables. Like, what does that mean for you as an individual? Yeah, does that resonate? I feel like I hope I'm not the only one that runs into that situation when I'm working with people.
Yeah, no, it's very common, and I think it's just human beings. We constantly need to remind ourselves of that why. So sometimes it can be helpful to even like write it down, or like something I do in sessions is if there's a challenge, I'll kind of say, okay, I hear this is a challenge, but I just want to make sure like what is your why right now? Like, has that changed? Is it still to, you know, be able to play with your kids when as you go through life, and have the energy to do that. So as an example, I think it's so powerful to know what your why is, because challenges are going to come regardless, and I think knowing your why is really what's going to help you push through it and identify like what's most important to you. So yeah, like no one wants to eat vegetables just off the well, maybe you do, but I think knowing your why can kind of make that more meaningful, and yeah, help you pull in so many other things into that behavior change.
Well, I'm glad. I feel like, yeah, it's sometimes like, oh, I should have all the things figured out on my side. There's just so much that I still need to learn and appreciate about everything. I mean, as we've said, many directions we could go with this conversation, but any areas that we have not covered yet that you feel like are worthy of bringing up or discussing, or noting quickly by passing by? I think we covered a good chunk of things. some meaningful things. But does anything else come to mind that you want to share with the folks watching / listening? Either of you? Yes, no, maybe so.
I think we've covered quite a bit, but I think I would say that I learn a lot from, as much as we are sharing what we've learned. A lot of that comes from experiences with our clients and patients. So um, I think if people that are listening on here, I encourage you to come forward to your dietitian and share, questions, even things that you're like, hey, I don't know about this. Like, I've not seen any resources around this. For example, Brandon sort of mentioned like culturally relevant foods and how sometimes that's not always seen on social media. Or if you are seeing things on social media and you're just not sure where that fits in your life, just having those conversations is helping us be better providers and also helping to support you better. So, yeah, I think that would be something that I know I'm grateful for, is always hearing about, because every client has their own experiences. We all walk down different paths. So just learning from the wealth of knowledge that our clients bring and just having that conversation can help us all grow.
Love that. Actually, a good note. There's always a chance for you to tailor your social media feeds with people that you feel like would be more helpful. A good plug for that, because there is people out there that will provide you with tailored messages, not necessarily like catering to every individual, but like there's so many people making content online that there's bound to be somebody that provides content that is applicable and practical for your context. So that's a good piece for sure. Matthew, any last thoughts before we wrap?
Yes, my last thoughts are, if you are someone looking into making health changes, nutrition changes, then, as we said earlier, just taking things one step at a time with simple strategies that work well for you. Maybe working with a professional to see what that might be to build that sort of awareness, and also just tailoring, as Brandon said, what you're looking at to things that are more relevant to you, relevant to your needs, relevant to where you are in life right now. There's tons and tons of health related social media content. Not all of it is evidence based. Not all of it is right for you at this time. And just keeping that in mind as you curate your feed and what you're looking at and your resources that you're looking at.
And a good point to note, we always are appreciative of people that leave us comments and insights as to what material you would find most helpful. If there was something from this episode or other episodes that you found helpful, hopefully that we can be a part of that curated feed for you. So our podcast, if you haven't found it in other channels, is on Spotify, it's on Apple, it's on YouTube. We put out clips pretty much everywhere, like TikTok, Instagram. Is there other places that we put this out, Matthew? I feel like those are the big ones for the clips from it.
Facebook sometimes.
Facebook sometimes. Okay. And depending on when you're listening to this, that might change. So don't hold me to that exactly.
LinkedIn in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. But I appreciate having you two here. This was a lovely conversation. Roshni, I hope to have you more on the podcast. It was a blast having you for your first episode with us. So thanks for taking the time to spend this morning with us.
Awesome. Yeah, grateful to be here. Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Matthew.
Alrighty. As we'll wrap it up here, everybody, thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Check out our other episodes if you haven't already. We'll see you next episode. Hopefully, if you found something engaging or helpful, can't wait for it. Have a good rest of your day wherever you are, or rest of your evening, depending on the time you're watching and listening to this. See you later.